I'm going to start with praying. So, dear Lord, thank you for this time. Thank you for this opportunity with this church. We have this space. That everyone's here, that everyone's eager to hear about you. Father, I pray that we learn more about your word, more about your personality, Father, more about your Son, and that we would just have open hearts and open minds. Father, we would just learn something new tonight that we could take away and we could use. Let's pray this in your name. Amen. So, a lot of guys in my small group have heard me kind of start like this talk before, but like growing up, both my parents are missionaries. My dad was a pastor sometimes. He'd preach every other week. We would go to church 3 times a week, and I grew up, hearing all the Bible stories, hearing all, going to church, hearing all the sermons, all the stories in the Old Testament, New Testament. And I grew up hearing that the Bible is the Word of God, and you trust it, and it's infallible, and it's inerrant, and it is absolutely perfect, and it is something that you can base your life upon. And I believe that, and I still believe that. But when I was 16, 17, I was in high school, and for the first time, people were like laughed at me, like, you don't really believe that stuff, do you? And I was like, yeah. And then what really shook me is some Christian leaders that I was very close with challenged me. And they were like, Jonathan, why do you believe what you believe? And I was like, well, it makes me feel good, and I know the Lord's out there. And he's like, no, that's all good, but like, why? Like, I don't know anything. Pretend I don't know anything. Like, tell me, why should I believe? Like, why on earth should I believe you? And it sent me on this path. And this is one of my favorite quotes. If we have the truth, it cannot be harmed by investigation. If we have not the truth, it ought to be harmed. So it's not like anything is sacred. Like a lot of people say, oh, this is something that I don't want to talk about because it's very personal or something. And I believe that you owe it to yourself to know what you believe and why you believe it. And if the evidence doesn't hold water, I would say look elsewhere. And so tonight I want to put the Bible on trial, you could say. And it's going to be a little bit of a roller coaster. We're going to go back and forth here. But starting off here, if you look at this, if you are a PhD student and you're looking at any scholarly works in the entire world, so you're looking at parchments and you're looking at Homer's The Iliad, you want to look at 3 things, right? You want to see when was it written, how many physical copies do we have of Homer's The Iliad, and how many years was it between when it was written and the copies that we have. If it's 2,000 years of a gap between when the events happen and the copies that we have, that obviously raises a lot of questions, because 2,000 years is a long time, right? Now, if we have Caesar, for example, you guys have all heard of Caesar. There's only 10 documents in the world that ever even talk about Caesar, and there's 1,000 years between when Caesar was alive and when we have the copies of the manuscripts. The leader right here is Homer's The Iliad, 643. This is a handy diagram. The bigger the yellow circle, the more physical manuscripts we have. Obviously, the more manuscripts we have, the more we can compare them and see the accuracy. Because if you can compare hundreds of them, you can say, wow, these are all way off and way all over the board. Or you can say, wow, like these really work with each other. So I know this is a lot of information, but you're going to get used to it because there's a lot of information. But you can see books that you've heard about, Aristotle. Demosthenes was one of the main Greek writers. I mean, a lot of the stuff that you've read about Greek culture was written by Demosthenes, and you would never doubt it. But there's 800 years between when he actually wrote them and when we have any kind of copies of what he wrote. So, there's prizes. Who can come close? I'm going to see who can come close enough to how many manuscript copies we have. 2 questions. How many manuscript copies do we have of the New Testament? And what kind of time frame do you think there is between when it was written and the copies that we have?
2001.
It's a good guess. Any higher? Any more for any more?
5,000.
5,000.
27,000.
27,000. Okay, hopefully this gives you more of an idea. I'm going to try and do it a little bit more to scale. Does that give you a little bit better of where I'm going here? Okay? Micah was right on the money. 24,000.
I was like,
There's 40 to 70 years. You're right on the money, David. Now, this number right here, 40 to 70 years, is actually, in my mind, the more important number. Because we have the entire New Testament, as is in this Bible right here, within 70 years of Christ dying. Which is very important. This actually should be updated because the earliest copy we have is 25 years. We have a copy of the entire book of John, 25 years after Christ died. And it was only discovered in the late 90s. So this is very recent. And what's really interesting is between the 24,000 manuscripts, there's a 99.7% accuracy. And the only errors we have, there's probably about 5,000 errors, but it's literally just a single missing, instead of saying waves, they miss the W, or they miss the S, or they miss a period. So it's not 100% perfectly textually accurate, but that's literally because they were handwritten. And what's really important is, you see this date right here, these were written when people were still alive who saw Jesus, who were there living at the time. And what was really important to the people at the time, the Hebrew scholars, the Greeks, they took auditory stories very, very seriously, because there was no video cameras, there was no things like this. And so if you told the wrong details, you were very quickly shot down. And if you wrote down the wrong stuff, people were scribes and they would copy down this information. And if you got it wrong, they would get it right. It was very, very important to them. It was so important, in fact, if you were a scribe, if you had 3 pages that you written with 1 error per page, for 3 consecutive pages, the whole scroll was burned, and you had to start all over again. Every time they wrote the name of God, they had to wash their entire body, wash their pen, and get fresh ink. That's how serious they took it. To get the information that, they knew, they'd seen this person before miracles, they'd seen him raised from the dead, and this is very important to us. So we have over 12,000 copies in Latin, 5,600 in Aramaic. We have over, I think, 14 different languages. So you say, okay, that's well and good. There's a copy of 2 Corinthians, 80, Papyrus 46, give you an idea. So you say, okay, that's good. We have 24,000 manuscripts, but those are manuscript copies of the Bible. It's copying itself. Now we have a 99.6% or 7% accuracy, but all that we read, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different writers write about the life of Jesus. And what's really important to me is that these are not Christian writers. Josephus, Tacitus, they were very hostile to the Christians. At least Tacitus was. Josephus was just he was a Jewish historian. He was not, Jews were not on good terms with the Christians at the time. But their entire professional work was to be a historian. So they would write down what they saw, and they would accurately record it, because that was their job, and they actually were entrusted. It was like the royal historian for the emperors. And it was their job. This is quite the table. I don't expect you to look at it all, but this is all the things that are mentioned about Jesus in these external works. So you have, he was a wise man, had a brother James, Josephus, accused by those of high standing among the Jews, suffered crucifixion, it's a big one. Christian endured persecution by Nero. Christians honored Christ as if for God. Pliny the Younger was very hostile to Christians. But it doesn't matter what you're hostile to, it was his job to write down what actually happened. I don't know if you guys have ever read this or not. This is a direct quote from Flavius Josephus. If you've ever been to school and you've ever learned anything about the Romans in history class, about 90% of it came from Tacitus and Josephus. So it's very embarrassing for non-Christians when they look at these documents and they say, okay, well, we learned so much about the Romans. But then it says something like this. They loved Jesus a wise man, and indeed one ought to call him a man, for he was one who performed surprising deeds, and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Christ. And when upon the accusation of the principal of men among us, Pilate had condemned him to a cross. This is really cool to me. Those who had first come to love him did not cease. He appeared to them, spending a 3rd day restored to life. For the prophets of God had foretold these things, and 1,000 other marvels about him. And the tribe of the Christians, so called after him, has still to this day not disappeared. And this is not a Christian. He has no vested interest in making anyone feel good. He is only answerable to the emperor, who at the time hated Christians. So it stands to me like, I don't even heard of this guy. But this is out there, and this is stuff you need to look at that's there if you look for it. The interesting thing is, the New Testament has places that we can look at. Nazareth, Jerusalem, it's a lot closer. It's 2,000 some years ago. Well, the Old Testament's 4,000 some years ago. So you say, okay, John, that's great. New Testament, very reliable. But what about the Old Testament? There's a lot of kind of crazy stories in there. It's pretty interesting. Well, how many of you guys, show of hands, have heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Okay, so it's kind of a story that gets thrown around, and it's not, people have heard of them, but they don't really know about it. So in 1947, there's a 15-year-old Bedouin shepherd called Muhammad, and him and his 2 cousins have a bunch of sheep. And they're in the Dead Sea Valley, and there's literally thousands of caves. And I imagine they are bored out of their minds. So the three of them start throwing rocks in these caves. And this is cave number 4. And it's very important because on this particular day, in March of 1947, they're throwing rocks down this cave and they hear something crack. And they're like, oh my gosh, like that's not normal that you hear. So they go down in the caves and they find, I have a picture of it here, these clay pots. And they were sealed in the top with glue. And the Dead Sea is very, very dry, very, very low humidity. And they're deep in this cave where the temperature doesn't change a lot. So these have been here 3,000 some years, okay? It's nuts. So they find these manuscripts, and they're like, this is cool, but it's not really worth anything to them. So they take them back to their tent. They literally are Bedouins that travel around, and they would hang them in their pots from the tent and show them to people who came around for 4 years. Finally, they got close enough, and they sold them on the black market, and they changed hands 7 times, and ended up in Jerusalem. And a private collector on the 7th purchase bought them for $29. The first 4 manuscripts. They are literally priceless now. Like you think paintings are priceless, like there literally could not be a money value put on them. Bought them $29, and he had a lot of other manuscript copies of the Bible, and he compared them, and he basically lost his mind. He wrote to Chicago, and he said, I believe I have found a very, very old copy of the Old Testament. So they pressured the government very hard, and they spent 9 years looking. They ended up finding 932 manuscripts in total in 8 or 9 different caves. And there's thousands of caves. So it was a huge undertaking. They had workers upon workers going through. And most of these were in very, very good condition. This is like a reenactment of what the boys found when they threw the rocks down. So this is them. It's been over 60 years, and they're still piecing together. They have some that are in 12,000 different pieces, but a lot are very, very well preserved. This is a Psalms passage. What's crazy to me is you can look at this, and you can open your Bible, okay? There's a 95% accuracy on average between any of these passages. This is the complete book of Isaiah, and this is written, like look at this. This is animal blood mixed with charcoal on parchment. This is almost 3,000 years old. It's crazy to me. And the thing is, they can look at it, and it's so well preserved, they can tell it was the Essenes, it was this cult of Jews, who took their scribe job very, very seriously. And that's pretty much all they did was just copied and copied and copied and copied. Every single book of the Old Testament is present except for Ruth. No, not Ruth. Esther. I'm sorry. They haven't found Esther yet. But if you look at your Old Testament, every single book shows up. 932 manuscripts, 2/3 of which are copies of the Bible. The other third are really interesting because they were daily life of the Essenes. They talk about the customs and practices they had which match up with the Bible. So it's things like this. They're very exciting because this literally adds over 1,000 years. We were kind of in a pickle up until 1947 because the manuscripts we had of the Old Testament were about 300 years before Christ died. And it was about 1,200 years after they were written. So there was a huge gap. And it wasn't great. And after 1956, when these were all published, you can go see them, it literally added just over 1,100 years to the age of our manuscripts. So this is something that, it blows me away. I mean, the Lord puts this here on purpose to give us, He doesn't leave you hanging, you know? Like, it may take a lot of time, and something you'll see over this whole presentation is things come out over time. And it's very, very embarrassing and very, very humbling to be a critic of the Bible because over time things appear, and honestly, it's very embarrassing. So you say, okay, that's great. We have all these manuscript copies. We have very close to 100% accuracy of our text. You can go to Walmart and buy a Bible and know that it was written, and it's not been like a game of telephone where it's like people passing it, and then they're like, oh, Jesus was 8 feet tall, and he did all this crazy stuff, and like it's that it's accurate. But who cares if none of this stuff happened, right? If you can go to this place and say, wow, here's this crazy Old Testament story, but we know for a fact that this place never existed, and we know for a fact that this dating is wrong. Who cares if you have manuscripts, okay? You have to look at the facts. One of my favorite stories, of many, this is the most fortified city of the time. Never been successfully captured. They had fortified it. You can't really see anything to scale here, but you have to think this bottom wall is 17 feet tall and 6 feet thick. And this top one is 26 feet tall, and it stands 63 feet off the ground. So they actually built the whole city. It's all man-made, and it's like a big molehill. So they had to have what's called a revetment wall at the bottom. And that holds all the earth in place. And that's very important. We'll see here in a second. It's things like this that are, you look at and you're like, okay, that's cool. But we'll see it. But I want to refresh you guys the story of Joshua. They have just crossed the Jordan River. Joshua's the new leader of Israel. And he, I'm sure, is very nervous because they're in the land of Canaan, right? And Jericho is the Canaanite city. It is like, it's the Washington, D.C. It's the big city that has never been taken. It is like very, very prosperous. And it's the fall of Jericho, Joshua 6. Now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. So they had it completely surrounded. None went out and none came in. And the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have given Jericho into your hand with its kings and mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. Thus shall you do for 6 days. I won't read the whole chapter, but they did this for 6 days. On the 7th day, when they make the long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout together, and the wall of the city will fall down flat. And there's a little footnote here. Flat's not a great word. It means fall under its own weight, like completely collapse. Okay? So Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said to them, take the Ark of the Covenant, march around for 6 days. On the 7th day, the last day, they rose early at the dawn of the day, and they marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. 7th time, priests had blown the trumpets. Joshua said to the people, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And the city and all that's within it will be devoted to the Lord for destruction. So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up in the city, every man straight before him, running into it. And they captured the city. Then they devoted all in the city to destruction, both men and women, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys, with the edge of the sword. So that's a very good story. It's very entertaining. But you're like, okay, that's cool. Do walls really fall down? And that's the exact question this guy had. John Garstang. This is in the 30s. There's 3 teams of archaeologists. There was a German team with 6 people. Didn't publish a lot. John Garstang was in the late 30s, and then Kathleen Kenyon was in the 50s. What he is standing before right here is very important because that is what's called the revetment wall. So that holds up the main wall. It is not the main wall. All it does is hold the earth back from just completely, imagine a big sand hill and it just goes everywhere. So he has excavated all the way down. Now this is the original drawing from Kathleen Kenyon's archaeological discovery. This right here is the revetment wall, and this right here is bricks and mortar. This is the collapse of the entire wall. Remember, that was 17 feet tall and 6 feet thick. So she had dug down and she found that the wall had completely collapsed. There's a better picture here. And she drew this in her archaeological discoveries. And their job as archaeologists is not to take sides. And their whole life's work is archaeology. And so when they publish these papers, they publish exactly what they find. And it's really interesting to me. So the people shouted, the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout. The wall fell down flat. So the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city. And I picture them literally being like, oh my gosh, that just collapsed. And they run all the way up. Now it's very interesting, they found a 12-foot section of wall that had not collapsed. And I want you guys to think about, there's a very important character, who was a woman, of why that may not have collapsed. That's a question worth a prize. So Joshua 6:18, you keep yourself from the things devoted to destruction, lest when you have devoted them to take any of the devoted things. Basically he's saying, only take the bronze and iron and gold. Leave everything else, which was very uncommon because when you captured a city, you took everything, you took the food, you wanted that for yourself because they're in the middle of the desert. And this to me is a key verse. And they burned the city with fire and everything in it. Only the silver and gold and the vessels of bronze and iron they put in the treasury of the house of the Lord. This is directly out of the Old Testament. So remember this verse. Here's Kathleen Kenyon. She's quite the looker. So this is from her archaeological report. The destruction was complete. Walls and floors were blackened or reddened by fire, and every room was filled with fallen bricks, timbers, and household utensils. In most rooms, the fallen debris was heavily burned. But the collapse of the wall, the eastern rooms, seemed to have taken place before they were affected by the fire. And when you excavate a structure like this, it's called a tell, and you got to think of like a birthday cake with hundreds of layers. So when you dig down, you can see, going through time, all the trash and bricks and everything that people have left. She and John Garstang dug down, they found a 3-foot thick burned layer, the entire city wide. What's really interesting is they found in every single house 3 or 4 pots of grain that had a 3-inch burn layer on the top. But the grain underneath was perfectly preserved. What's really interesting is when they crossed the Jordan River, right before they attacked Jericho, they celebrated the Passover. Does anyone know for prize when the Passover is? Any good Jews out there? April 22nd. So the Passover celebrates the end of the harvest. Well, it's not celebrating, but it's always at the end of the harvest. And it says they were in springtime, okay? So it's really, really odd to these archaeologists. It caused them great concern because in every single house, there's all these burned pots of grain, which if you're under siege for a long period of time, why would you leave all this food and not eat it? Because the only way to get a city like this back in the day was lay siege for 6 months to 2 years until they starved out. They have all this untouched grain. They have this absolute blackened layer across here. That's just really interesting to me. They had an issue. They were trying to date when this happened. This is just a side note. They date these things by pottery. And it's dated to 1400 and 1406 BC, which is the exact time when Joshua would have crossed the Jordan River and come in. So literally everything is 100%. At the end of the chapter, it says, Joshua laid an oath on them at that time, saying, Cursed before the Lord be the man who rises up and rebuilds this city, Jericho. And something interesting, I think, is they found that not a single settlement, imagine Washington, D.C. gets destroyed, and no one ever successfully rebuilds it and lives there. They've lived there for 10, 20 years, but diseases would come, and they could dig down and see that there was never, ever a successful settlement of people after the destruction of Jericho. And honestly, it's looking at stuff like this. I don't know if you've ever seen anything like this. I mean, you have to look through and you have to dig through and say, what does these archaeological digs, with people much smarter than I, what have they written down? And they have no vested interest to support the Bible. In fact, it makes them incredibly uncomfortable because both of them are not religious at all, but they just write what they find. A couple of examples that I think are really interesting. Luke is one of my favorite books of the New Testament. And it starts in Luke 1, 1 to 4. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of things that have been accomplished among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us, it seemed good to me, also having followed all these things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus. This first paragraph of Luke doesn't really mean a lot to us in English, but if you were reading this as a Greek reader, this would stand out to you a ton, because he wrote in a certain style that only the Greek historians of top-notch would write in. Imagine opening a letter and saying, Dear so-and-so. It's the normal way you open a letter. Well, the normal way you would open a writing like this was like this. If it was this type of literature. He's not saying, hey, I'm writing this cool novel. He's saying, I am writing an orderly account for you from eyewitnesses. But it's kind of a scary thing because it opens it up to really, really, really heavy criticism. And John, Luke, and Acts have had the heaviest scrutiny you could ever even imagine upon them. And it's interesting to me, as we'll see, Luke could be considered the best historian in the entire world. In fact, most non-Christian scholars hold Luke as #1 spot, John at the #2 spot of historians in the entire world, because they're both at 100% accuracy. And there's many, many, many ways where they can be tested. You can see here, these are all the historical figures Luke mentions in Luke and Acts. And these are real people. And these are people that can be tested, and they can say, did Festus ever live? When was Herod the Great alive? King Herod Agrippa II, Herod Antipas, Ananias, Sapphira. Are these real people? Did they ever live in this time? So, for a good prize, you had to take a guess. How many facts do you think you could check? If you were to fact check, just like your papers at school, Luke, the first 2 verses of chapter 3, how many facts do you think? Just throw out a ballpark. 12? That's a good guess. 10? A little high.
23.
21. There's 20. If you were really splitting hairs, you'd go from 19 to 21. For checking, is this accurate? And just as a side note, this word right here, tetrarch, is really, really, really interesting because it shows up nowhere else in Greek literature. In Acts, he calls people proconsul, praetoria, and tetrarch. And the equivalent would be like if you lived in Fort Collins and you knew that the mayor of Fort Collins had a nickname. And everyone in Fort Collins knew it, but it wasn't widely known outside of Fort Collins. And it was actually written down. I didn't split it up as closely as I could have. For the longest time, this was a huge criticism against Luke. They said Tetrarch is not a term that you would use for this region of Galilee, for Herod. It is not correct. Proconsul is not correct. It was a big sticking point for a lot of people. And in the late 90s, they found 19, in one decade, they found 19 inscriptions bearing the word Tetrarch. And it was found that it was actually a very local term. It was somebody who lived here. It's like I said, a nickname about the mayor. It's something like, wow, that person really was there and they really knew what they were talking about. These are things you can open your Bible and you can read. And there's, for sake of time, there's only 3 people that I picked out to do research on. Pontius Pilate, Lysanias, and Cephius. Or Caiaphas, actually. I hope you can see this in bold. These 3 people are only mentioned in the Bible and the work of Josephus. There's no archaeological remains of them ever having lived, at least until the early 60s. So here again, they're like, man, if this person really was Pontius Pilate, being governor of Judea, which is like saying he's the governor of Colorado, there really would be evidence of this person. So it was a big problem, and they kept looking for it. And they found, in 1961, the Pontius Pilate inscription. And people much smarter than me have recreated this inscription. They can figure out exactly what it says. It says, "To the divine Augustus, this Tiberian Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, has dedicated this." And it was in a temple built by Herod the Great, and it was in the wall. And it was like, imagine you have pictures on the wall, but these were embedded in the stone. And this temple is under the earth, so they had to excavate the whole thing. And they find this stone, 1961. It was a very, very big find. And it's the first archaeological evidence that Pontius Pilate ever existed. This is an inscription found in Alba near Damascus, and it's Lysanias Tetrarch, the region of Abilene. And you remember, this is one of the main guys. He doesn't say there was a guy who lived here at this time and was a good ruler. It's not any kind of vague issue or any kind of vague statement. He's saying this is the person in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, not the 16th, not the 14th, and the 15th. So Lysanias was a big sticking point because the only Lysanias we knew of died 40 years before Christ was ever born. So there's a huge problem when Luke says Lysanias was the ruler when John the Baptist was around. 60 years later. 65. Almost 70 years later. It was a huge problem because we're like, wow, we know for sure this guy died. This is a big problem. And then we found this inscription. There was actually 2 Lysaniases. Not related at all. Tetrarch of Abilene. The other one was a ruler somewhere else. It's funny how these things, this was only discovered in 1995. I mean, this stuff is still fresh. This, I would give $5 to anyone who knows what this is.
A jewelry box.
No. It is a box, though.
Is it like a coffin tomb thing that you put a body in?
For what?
For
Look at the ruler.
For a baby.
No. But you're very close.
child.
Now, it's known as an ossuary. And they would put...
Holds the organs.
No. Holds the heart.
That's Egypt.
No, they didn't have a lot of room to bury people. And if you were famous and you were well known, you would have a tomb, and it would be your family tomb. There wasn't a lot of room. So after a certain amount of time, enough time to where there was just bones left, they would come in, and they would have an ossuary box like this, and they put your bones in it. What's really interesting about this one is if you had a lot of money, and you were very well known, you had it inscribed. Normally they were very rough, and they were just cut out of the rock. This one not only has a design on it, it has an inscription. It says, Miriam, daughter of Yeshua, son of Caiaphas, priest of the Messiah from Beth Imri. Remember Caiaphas was our third person, and there was no evidence of him. If you remember Matthew, when Jesus was being sent to crucifixion, it was Caiaphas who said, "Are you the ruler of the Jews? Are you the Son of God?" And Jesus said, "It is as you say." Remember, he was very much opposed to Jesus, and he was the high priest at the time, who was basically like, he was like the Supreme Court judge, and he was the one that put Christ on the cross. So of course he mentions this person, but we have no like backing until now. This is 2011 they found this. What's really interesting is this word right here, Messiah. If you look back to 1 Chronicles, David made 24 people priests of the temple in the Jewish time. And they would rotate once every 24 days. It was your time to be a priest. And when you were the priest, you were coming up. And he is in the line of Messiah, which you can actually trace his line back. And this traces him back to 1 Chronicles to David. Something interesting. Sir William Ramsay had this to say. He said, "You may press the words of Luke in a degree beyond any other historians, and they stand the keenest scrutiny and the hardest treatment, provided always the critic knows the subject and does not go beyond the limits of science justice." Sir William Ramsay was Indiana Jones times 100. He is the preeminent, he's considered the best archaeologist that ever lived. Spent 20 years excavating the New Testament. This is the last one. So, my last example is in John 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of people disabled used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" Remember this line right here. Do you want to get well? In Greek, I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. Look at this. Remember this. This is in quotations and italic marks for a very specific reason. "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me get into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. Now, a huge problem is there was no pool of Bethesda. For the longest time, up until the 1950s, there was no pool. They had scoured Jerusalem for the longest time. It's the holy city, and they're like, this is like really bad. And there was just no record of it. And in late 50s, they discovered that during the Crusades, basically they had covered over the pool, taken a bunch of the stones, and they built a church to St. Anne on the site. And so it was completely covered and went underground. So a team of archaeologists went and dug up the entire pool of Bethesda. Here's another picture of it. It was huge. And it was spring-fed, which is why the water was bubbled. But it was very, very important because what they found here was a mosaic, and they found a temple in this excavation. This is the remains of the Church of St. Anne, which is also in ruins. But it was built, and they had torn it all down above ground level. This guy right here, Asclepius. They found a temple called an Asclepion. And this is a Greek god. He is the Greek god of healing, of doctors. It's very interesting because this is where we get the modern day, you've seen this before, an ambulatory at a hospital, because he's the Greek god of physicians. And in the day, it was a very, very popular cult. And they had a very, very rigid set of instructions to be healed by Asclepius. The first step was to get in the holy water. The second step was to go lay down with snakes that were non-poisonous, have dreams, join the cult. It was very, very interesting. They found this temple there. And remember this Greek phrase right here? The only other place this is found is said by the Asclepian monks, I would say. The temple workers for this cult, they would say this exact phrase. They would say to the invalids, "Do you wish to get well?" in Greek, this exact phrase. So when Jesus comes up to the man, I like to think of this. He's been laying there 38 years. He's an invalid. He's probably completely wasted away. He has no muscle mass. He can't get up. He's like a corpse. Jesus comes up to him and he says something he's heard 1,000 times over, I'm sure, his entire life. "Do you want to get well?" It's almost like the irony of like saying it the exact same way these temple workers say, with all their robes, and they were very, very fancy, and they said, "Do you wish to get well? Well, come lay with the snakes, and come bathe in the water." And Jesus says it to him as Lord. And he says, "Of course, I want to get well. Why would I not? But I can't get in the water. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Jesus said, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." And once the man was cured, he picked up his mat and walked. These are things that you can't necessarily get from reading the ESV. It takes a little bit of digging, but it's out there. And I encourage you guys, go look at it. It's there. And it's something I challenge you with. And my question to leave you guys with is, if Luke is 100% considered the most accurate historian the world has ever known, see this. On the whole, archaeological work has unquestionably strengthened the confidence in the reliability of the scriptural record. More than one archaeologist has found his respect for the Bible increased by the experience of excavation in Palestine. Archaeology has in many cases refuted the views of modern critics. My question to you is something I want you to take away. If Luke took so much care and John took so much care to get the most random, insignificant names and places of office and years correct, how correct do you think he was when he said, I saw the Christ raised after 3 days. I saw his empty tomb. I walked with him. I stuck my fingers in the wounds in his palm. And this is something that I give to you guys. It's like a stepping stone, it's a conversation I've had maybe with my small group guys. I'm trying to give you guys bricks. I'm trying to give you guys a foundation. What you do with it is up to you. But when people ask you and laugh at you and say, how on earth can you believe in this book of fairy tales, in this book of thousands of years old? You don't know this is true. Think about stuff like this and think about the options that you have and the truth that's out there, because the nice thing is, no matter how you read them, the facts are the same. So, that's what I'll leave you guys with. Thank you for listening. Ran a little bit over time. We're going to have small groups. I want to pray really quick first. Father, thank you for this great audience of people that want to hunger after you, Father, that want to learn more about your word, more about your personality, Father. I want to learn about you healing the people and providing hope that only you can provide in salvation. Father, I thank you for the evidences that you've given us and the foundation that we can stand upon. And Lord, I just thank you personally that you just haven't left us hanging, that we're not wandering around in the dark wondering if we can trust anything. Father, I pray that we would be motivated to both seek this out, but to stand for the truth, Father. I pray that we would seek the truth, we would stand for it, and that we would be able to be lights, that our faith would be real, and it would be something to be strive for. I pray this in your name. Amen.
All right.